Good morning. It's Tuesday, April 8th. Senate Agriculture. We're going to have a busy week. We're going to start off this morning because we have a council in the room that's going to be in 15 other places, and he hasn't figured out how to split himself yet. But Councilor, come on up, please, sir.
Morning. Morning.
Bill, the side by side is on your website.
I'm gonna walk through a side by side of S-124, your miscellaneous agricultural subjects bill, and the Senate Natural Resources proposed amendment to that that came out on Friday. There is that side by side that is on your website, and just walk through the changes or the differences. If that's okay. Well, the first is on page 5. And there is the EPA had reviewed the bill that came out and worked with ANR to make some conforming changes that they preferred. And this is one of those changes that they wanted, and instead of it saying operations to turn into be a CAPO, that when the Secretary of Natural Resources determines a concentrated feeding operation is required to obtain a CAPO permit, and then referring to the fact that the CAPO is required to get a permit. So it's more technical than substantive, but it's effectively what EPA requested. Okay. On page 6, you'll see in the language that passed your committee that the Secretary of Agriculture was immediately required to refer potential discharges to ANR. That has been changed to promptly refer the potential discharge. I think there was concern that immediately meant that they would have to do it as soon as they learned of it instead of within a reasonable time. And you'll see that change actually in the next couple of changes. So on page 12, you'll see that same change of immediately to promptly with regard to the referral. And then on page 14 and 15, again, adding promptly when the Agency of Agriculture is required to refer a discharge to the Secretary of Natural Resources. And then on the flip side, on page 15, when there is no discharge, when the Secretary of ANR refers to the Secretary of Agriculture. That'll let you go to page 18. Now you're moving.
I'm sorry, Michael, and forgive me. With I'm sorry.
No. Go ahead. No.
Is there a definition of promptly?
There is not.
Okay.
There is the common understanding of what promptly means. Dictionary didn't touch.
Right. If there's no statutory definition, which there is not, then the court's going to refer just to the common interpretation, and they will literally look at a Webster's dictionary.
One man's promptly is another man's slowly.
Right. The judges are.
Right.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. I'm just
We
I wanted to make sure that
we try to avoid modifiers.
okay.
But in this instance where there's a notice requirement and some timing related to it, this is what the agency and EPA agreed to.
Okay. Thank you.
On page 18, you're moving out of the Title VI authority of the Agency of Agriculture, moving into the authority of the Agency of Natural Resources. One of the big changes in this Senate natural proposal is you have waters of the United States separate, and then some permitting it was related to waters of the United States, and in some permitting it was just related to waters of the state. And the ANR had actually been in here before you passed it out and said they were rethinking that and whether or not to just go to one definition. And that's what they've done. They've combined the definition of waters and waters of the United States into one definition of waters. So instead of in some places it's waters of the United States, in some places it's just waters of the state, it's now just going to be waters or waters of the state. And it will incorporate that definition of waters of the United States into the larger state umbrella. And so that's what you see on page 18.
I can tell you as far as in the talks of, as far as people want to negotiate with me and myself, that was a bigger deal to them than it was for myself. And if that was all that we had to give up, then I was totally comfortable with that, knowing that the waters, in my opinion, and what I was being told, waters of the state was tougher regulation versus the waters of the United States. So if that's what I had to give up, I was fine for that.
Can the, being it says this law, so can the, whose law will take precedence if there's an issue? Will it be the federal law oversees the state law, or will the state law oversee the federal?
It's a little bit of both, because the state's a delegated program, the statutes and program that the state has to meet EPA standards, which is why you're doing this. And once it's met EPA standards, it's the state that runs the program. But EPA always has kind of an override over supervision authority to say, hey, we don't agree with your permitting decision. We're gonna come in and we're gonna permit where you wouldn't have permitted. But in Vermont, the standards are going to be higher than the EPA program. So I don't see that EPA interjection into specific permitting. Maybe it's
I'm actually seeing it the other way around, that the farmer looks at the regs and says, hey, here it says in the Fed, this is what I need to do, and the state's pushing me to do more.
well,
Can they?
that's one of the things the Agency of Ag was very kind of focused on, and just keeping the program for CAPOs limited to what the federal Clean Water Act regulations say. And so the changes that you will see really are what the language is in the Clean Water Act rules. Now, there is going to be a rulemaking that ANR is going to go through to implement this program and to provide finer detail. Will it be exactly the same as the Clean Water rules? Probably not, because of some of the standards and the terms, etc. But I think the Agency of Ag is very focused on keeping this program as close to the federal rules as possible.
Thank you.
On page 19 in your bill, you had two definitions that the Agency of Natural Resources asked you to include, but they never actually used the terms. So we have a policy not to include surplusage when it's not, when you're not using something or it has no effect, don't include it. Now, they might ultimately include those two definitions in the rule I just spoke of, but you don't need them in the bill if they're not used. They did come forward with a new definition for direct discharge, which is used elsewhere in statute. And so that was added to the definition section in Title 10 for ANR's authority. And if you would like, you can move on to page 21. The definition of a large CAPO. The real change is on page 22. This language in your bill mirrors what's in the Federal Clean Water Act, that when a large farm becomes a large CAPO, they have one of these discharges or activities that occur. But there was concern that it really doesn't belong in the definitions. It's more of a when the permit is required. And so the Senate Natural Resources heard testimony from some interested parties to move this language. It's the same exact language, but it's moved to section 11, 10 VSA 1263H, which is on page 36. But you no longer see it in the definitions, but it's still in S-124 as recommended by Senate Natural Resources. And that allows you to go to page 23. This is a conformity with the Clean Water Act rules. This is something that the Agency of Ag looks for when you're going to have an MFO. One of the conditions is that waste are discharged into waters through a man-made ditch flushing system or other similar man-made device. the agency was arguing that using point source as you did was potentially too broad, and they're right, because if you look right down on that page in subdivision 10, you'll see the definition of point source, which has a lot more terms, including concentrated animal feeding operation. So the Senate Natural Resources Committee conformed to the Clean Water Act language as requested by the agencies. Then you can move to page 25. In the definition of small concentrated animal feeding operation. You had, again, permitting standards built into the definition, which is tracks to some extent the Clean Water Act rules. The agencies both said, let's just refer to, it is defined as a CAFO by the regulations adopted under the Federal Clean Water Act. And that was something that EPA supported that they did. Again, it's not really changing the threshold, but it's allowing a little bit of flexibility in what standard is going to be implemented. You'll see page 25, subdivision 16, waters of the United States. This is slightly different because you're not going to call it as the same meaning as waters. It's just going to be the same meaning as defined by the Federal Clean Water Act. I'd like to provide a CFR site, a specific site to the definition and federal rule, but we don't know what that's going to be because they're going to revise that rule again. You know, ultimately, if they ever come up with a kind of stable rule, I will change that definition to the citation, but right now I didn't have to rely on.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
So the definition of large CAFO and small CAFO takes out the conditions, but it doesn't for me.
Yeah,
Is there a reason?
they are comfortable with leaving it in the definition section for medium. They just thought it worked better there, but not for large and small. Or was it
Functionally not different.
functionally not this? On page 27, in the Secretary's authorities to implement the Ag Water Quality Program, changing your language about designating any AFO as a CAFO, slightly designate any AFO that meets the definition of a CAFO under the Federal Clean Water Act regulations as a CAFO. And then one of the things that I noticed reviewing the bill, the Secretary doesn't have specific authority to require any AFO to obtain a CAFO permit upon the determination that the AFO is discharging to waters of the state. And that's actually a key part of this program. So that was added in as the Secretary's authority. Down at the bottom of the page, on page 36, it says 36, in subdivision 7 in the Senate Natural version, that they wanted to clarify that the Secretary's authority to access AFOs and CAFOs to do inspection. And then you come to page 27. These is section 1353. These are the exemptions from discharge. First, getting rid of waters of the United States, because it's now going to be waters of the state. Recognizing that it's a permitted CAFO, has this exemption. And that exemption is the agricultural stormwater exception, and it's rewritten. It's the same substantive standard that the farm that's permitted doesn't need a permit for land application of manure, litter, or processed wastewater when they are doing so in a way that manages site-specific conditions. But in your version, you use site-specific nutrient management plan. In their version, they said in accordance with the federal regulations under the Clean Water Act that qualifies for an agricultural stormwater discharge. It's kind of a distinction without a difference. The agricultural stormwater discharge exemption is applied when you're applying according to site-specific nutrient conditions. So that was really an EPA requested change. I think they just want to have the foundational, the what you use for kind of the basics to be in reference to the CAFO rules or the CAFO statute. And that's what Senate Natural Resources did. So for unpermitted large CAFOs, this is on page 28, the top of the page. CAFO shall be considered an exempt ag discharge only where the litter or processed wastewater is land applied according to site specific nutrient management. So it's still the concept, it's still what you've had, but EPA wanted reference to their standards, reference to compliance with their rules, etc. On page 29, you had language that the small small SOs were going to maintain documentation, soil testing, and nutrient management practices. That's going to be removed. That's ultimately going to be addressed in making if an SFO is required to become a CAFO, then that's going to be something addressed in rulemaking. If it's an SFO on its own, it's never determined to be a CAFO, well, then it's a small farm and it's going to be regulated by the Agency of Agriculture. So it really doesn't need to be referenced here. And then for some reason that I never fully understood, the agencies and EPA asked that the language about prima facie evidence sufficient to determine that there is a discharge be struck. I don't know why, but I don't think it harms or really creates an issue because the language that you had, A&R goes out and observes a discharge, observes basically staining drainage swales or standing water. Those are all evidence of a discharge anyway. They're still going to use that as evidence of a discharge. For some reason, they wanted it out as referencing as prima facie evidence. Page 29. This is a community stakeholder group that you had in your bill. A lot of this is really not changing substance, changing kind of the level of substance that this group needs to meet. So it's not part of a rulemaking process anymore. It's going to be effectively just the stakeholder group. It has to include public process. It has to engage certain specific stakeholders. They are a little bit more detailed about who they are. They call out watershed groups and water quality experts. They are more specific about what kind of A&R CAFO program would be implemented. So they're saying the establishment of the CAFO permitting program administered by A&R that ensures compliance with the Clean Water Act's requirement and no farms discharge in violation of the Clean Water Act's CAFO permit. That's what the CAFO program is, right? So it's just more detail of elaborating on your language.
Thank you, Chair. And this is what the EPA want to see in this, correct?
EPA
Or A&R.
well, the stakeholder group is more A&R and Agency of Ag and the water quality advocates and the committee. We're now not in EPA requested changes. This is more the interested parties in the committee asked for these
And
changes.
you remember what we had said when we were doing this, so there was gonna be a bigger landing page as we pass this out, that we could get to the point, and it's not done yet neither. So, trying to get it out of here with the lightest fingerprint is what we can have on it right now. So there's gonna be more to have. It's gonna be more after it leaves our committee after we pass it out. We have no control of that. And, so that's really
Where we're at.
yeah. Yes.
So Michael, just small point, section 9, subsection A. I believe on line 4, the stakeholder should be plural.
Moving on to page 31. really down at the bottom of the page about assessing whether the regulatory structure for administering ag water quality requirements is sufficient to ensure that water pollution is controlled consistent with the Clean Water Act, or whether sole regulation by any should be implemented. It really, I mean, you had is sufficient, or whether further structural changes such as sole regulation should be implemented. This is just adding finer detail to that requirement. And then you move out of the stakeholder group on page 31, you're into some of the conforming amendments. You're in 10 VSA 1259, which is the first of the requirement for a permit, but then on 31 sub F, the exemptions from that permit, that this is to clarify when a farm that is complying with the RAPs is exempt from a discharge permit. You had provided that the introductions of waste comply with the Federal Clean Water Act and federal CAFO regulation. They had provided that the introduction of waste are from sources that do not discharge pollutants from a point source and comply with the Federal Clean Water Act and federal CAFO regulation. This is really almost not necessary, because if you're discharging a pollutant, then you're not and you're unpermitted, then you're not complying with the Federal Clean Water Act and the federal regs. But it is really just to clarify that if you're not permitted in discharging, you don't get the RAP exception. On page 32, there was language in existing law and in your version that said A&R shall delegate to the Secretary of Agriculture, Ag, non-point source pollution control program planning. EPA didn't like the word delegate. So that was removed, and it says A&R shall regulate AFOs in accordance with federal requirements, and the Secretary of Ag shall implement the state non-point source control program on its own. Similarly, page 33, there was reference to shared authority. EPA didn't like shared authority. It's now concurrent authority. Page 35. This is to clarify that when there's an application for a permit, and before issuing the permit or determining that the application is complete, A&R may take appropriate steps to secure compliance. So they go out, they learn that a farm needs a permit, but the farm is discharging. Before that they determine that the application is complete, they can order the farm to take remedial measures to address that discharge. Page 35, sub G, there was an any missing. It was probably because there was duplicative any's and spell check. Page 36, you had said that the Secretary shall amend and issue the medium CAFO general permit by December 15, 2025. It's not going to be the medium, it's going to be the CAFO general permit. So it will be for large, medium, small, not just for medium. And then that language from the large CAFO definition from your version about when that large the CAFO is going to need the permit. Large CAFO shall not be required to have a CAFO permit. That's one of the following conditions are met: waste or discharge. Waste or discharge directly into waste that originate outside the production facility or come in contact with the animal, or there's a precipitation related discharge that was not in accordance with site-specific nutrient conditions. Same language from your version, move out of the definitions into the permitting standard section. And then the last change is in the exceptions for stormwater discharges. Currently, no permit is required for those stormwater runoff complying with the ag practices. You just said, and the Federal Clean Water Act has to be complied with. They're saying it's not subject to the Federal Clean Water Act and it's enabling regulations as determined by the Secretary. So if it is subject to that, it's going to need a permit. It's not going to get to stormwater exemptions. And those are the differences.
Okay, so why don't we stop Michael for a couple minutes because we're gonna shelve this and then we're gonna come back to it maybe at 11 o'clock and have Senator Hardy have what she wants to say and get to some of the other witnesses, but anything for, for Michael?
I did talk to the Senate Secretary. It's going to be referred to Senate Finance
Yeah.
because you may recall it had those provisions around if you're required to get a CAFO permit, you don't pay your fee to the agency that you pay to ANR. And so,
And Senate, Pro Tem had said that we're probably it's gonna probably hang on the wall for a little bit until we get our miscellaneous, House Ag bill out. And we're probably gonna steal the language off of that bill and attach it to the House miscellaneous Ag bills the way he would wish it to continue on. So we won't be reporting this bill, until a little bit later. But as of that we were good, safe, as long as it comes out, it's in finance, which we should have no problems with.
great.
Thank you very much for all the
Thank you
help
for
on that.
accommodating me. I appreciate it.
No, we appreciate you very much, especially because we asked you to come in.
Have a good day.
Okay, now we're gonna get to Michelle. How are you?
All right.
Good, come on up. Oh, yes. Good morning.
Morning.
So, first of all, thank you for being flexible with that. We appreciate it very much. Your time's very valuable and important. Take as much time as you need and, we're here to talk about H-167.
Okay, great. So I'm, for the record, Michelle Boslin from Wyndham 3. I represent Westminster, Rockingham, and Brookline in northern Wyndham County. And I do have a written statement that I have posted on your committee page with the help of your committee assistant, which was actually my floor report that I'll share with you. And then there's time, if there are questions, I'm happy to address those. So H-167 is known as the Vermonters Feeding Vermonters Bill, and it supports a critical program that the Vermont Food Bank started in 2018. The program provides food insecure Vermonters with access to local farm products while providing a steady market for Vermont farmers. The Vermont Food Bank established this program in response to produce and proteins being the items most requested by community partner food distribution organizations. Rather than investing Vermont dollars in fruit from Florida or potatoes from Maine, this program designates funding to support local Vermont producers from squash and root vegetables to apples and berries. The program also provides access to Vermont-raised meat, dairy, and eggs. The Vermonters Feeding Vermonters program empowers the Vermont Food Bank in partnership with the Department of Agriculture and Markets to contract with Vermont farm producers to make their products available to people who otherwise would have limited or no access to these products. 299 Vermont farms were supported by this program in 2024. Vermonters Feeding Vermonters aligns with long-term goals for farm and food stability in Vermont, including the Vermont Food Security Roadmap to 2035, and also the Vermont Agriculture and Food System Strategic Plan to 2030. The program was expanded during the pandemic with a mix of state and private philanthropic funds and contracted for $2.4 million worth of farm products from Vermont farmers in 2023 and $2.38 million in 2024. A majority of the Vermont farm products purchased with this program do go to local food pantries, others to organizations who use the funds to purchase CSA shares or to purchase directly from farms. So you can see if you're following along, the breakdown of the funds recently included 73% large-scale wholesale purchasing directly from farmers, 27% in Vermont Food Bank partner mini grants, and then farms share CSAs of 6%. In 2024, the Vermont Food Bank distributed more than $1.4 million pounds of local food in Vermont. And food went out to over 300 Vermont Food Bank network and community partners across the state last year. So this program really did a very effective job at supporting local farmers and getting food to food insecure Vermonters. And on that note, I've got some information about food insecurity. So food insecurity has been increasing in recent years, making programs like this especially needed. In 2022, figures from Feeding America, a national food security study, it was found that our food insecure population in Vermont was 11.7% of our population, which makes over 75,000 people. During the pandemic, our ability to meet the needs of food insecure Vermonters went up with the help of federal funding. But food insecurity is increasing again as the pandemic support programs have come to an end and with recent changes in federal funding. In my community, the Putney Food Shelf, a community partner with the Vermonters Feeding Vermonters program, told me they have experienced a 250% increase in the number of households they serve since 2020. And just since 2022, the increase has been 158%. So among the people that are food insecure, 57% of them are above the SNAP threshold, meaning they don't qualify for what was once known as food stamps. And then 43% are below the SNAP threshold, but still are not able to have their food needs met. For people with limited financial resources, individuals are faced with difficult choices. Should they pay the rent or electric bill, pay the copay on their prescriptions or medical appointments, or buy fresh meat and produce? Vermonters Helping Vermonters helps Vermonters to have their food needs met when facing difficult choices. Numerous food programs have been cut on the federal level recently that impact Vermont farmers and also Vermont consumers. Over $1 billion in USDA cuts were announced recently, impacting both farmers and students through eliminating local purchasing priorities for school lunches, among other programs. Supporting our existing Vermont programs is critical for both food insecure individuals and our Vermont farmers. Without the funds requested from the general fund for this project, the Vermont Food Bank will have to severely cut back this program. With so many farms struggling to survive in today's market, the funds from these contracts are of extraordinary benefit to sustaining Vermont agriculture. Without them, we may lose more local farms. Between 2012 and 2023, nearly half of Vermont's small dairy farms closed down. In total, Vermont currently has 6,537 farms. And in 2012, we had 7,338. So we've lost 800 farms in the last 12 or 13 years. This bill, as originally intended, would continue the program with $2 million from the general fund. This would benefit Vermont consumers and provide reliable income for participating Vermont farms. I have a couple of quotes from farmers who had contracts through this program that I'd like to share with you. This is so helpful to us and our small farm stand. By supporting us and encouraging your clients to access healthier food items, you're making the community better for all of us. We hope to continue working with you every year and support the mission of this grant. And one more quote. I have loved working with the Vermont Food Bank network partner, Neighbors in Action. They have amazing volunteers and staff who really care about the community and providing fresh quality food for those who are struggling to have their food needs met. Having been part of this grant program for several years now, it has really helped support my bottom line, giving me flexibility in what I choose to bring, reducing waste on the farm, and helping support our mission of serving our community. From the Vermont Food Bank's annual survey of larger scale producers, 100% of participating growers reported increased stability related to selling large, reliable quantities and increased sales goals through this program. It enabled farmers to hire more workers, to invest in equipment, and other steps that make farming more sustainable. With the federal funding to support farmers and food banks cut back severely recently, this bill will help to continue to support our farmers and food insecure individuals in important ways. So a lot of that was sort of background about why we need to support our farms and our food consumers here in Vermont, but I'm happy to address more individual questions about the bill if you have those. And I do have actually a couple of people in the room from the food bank who could answer more details if I don't know the answer to what you're curious about.
Ready?
What did the bill ask for appropriation for?
We asked for 2 million, and out of the House appropriations, we were granted 500,000 that was approved in the budget. So we're hoping that more will end up in the end, but any amount that we put in the food bank will put to good use.
Thank you.
We're good? Thank you. Appreciate it. I appreciate your flexibility. It really kind of helped us out this morning. So we hear what your ask is and we'll consider it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. we're juggling here a little bit, Senator, Ron Hinsdale. S-118, how much time do you think you have on that?
If I can be extremely brief.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Well, I want you to have all the time that you want.
7 minutes.
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
We'll give you 8.
Okay, great. One time me.
That's the kind of people that incredibly magnetic.
Good morning for the
Good
record.
morning. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me, Senator Keisha Ron Hinsdale, Chittenden Southeast, and I think relevant to this bill and the testimony I'm about to provide is former chair of Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. And I think often the kind of tourism and economic development that we need to continue to make Vermont and its working lands vibrant is somewhere between our two committees. It just came up in our committee last week when we were talking about topics we'd like to take up, the notion of agritourism. And I said, I have a bill for that. And it's where it should be, which is Senate Agriculture. I think you all are keenly aware, more aware than other committees, that our farms need to be able to diversify to welcome people to buy local goods and products. And often if they're trying to bring their families or really anybody who can't, just stand around on a farm for more than 5 minutes, they need to have snacks available, maybe a bathroom, some amenities and opportunities for people to really interact with the farm economically. By the way, I did encourage Senator Major to watch the show Clarkson's Farm. It's on Amazon Prime. But I highly recommend it. It's actually winning a lot of awards in the UK, and Prince William, I think, just appeared on the show because it's about a farm trying to survive in the Cotswolds, owned by someone extremely wealthy who used to be on the show Top Gear, which I think is coming back. But that's another story, Jeremy Clarkson. And he's essentially dumping as much money as he can with the help of Amazon into showing on film in a very enjoyable documentary style how hard it is to be a farmer, how much money you lose trying to make it work, and how inane it is to be dealing with municipal and state regulations that limit your ability to grow or access diversified income. So the ideas in this bill came from a few different sources, a couple of my constituents who I'd be happy to share the contact information for if you'd like to hear from them. Becky Castle and her husband have Sisters of Anarchy Ice Cream and a farm in Shelburne, a working farm in Shelburne. Kieran Killeen has Killing's Crossing in Charlotte, and they want to be able to do more classes, cooking classes and things like that add a lot of value to connect people with farms. And a constituent of Senator Heffernan, Paul Ralston, who I think is doing incredible work and worth hearing from, a former House member and a very well-respected business owner who started Vermont Coffee Company, who is trying to create food security in his area of Addison County through gleaning and then through processing food and making actual meals available to people who need food, which is the kind of value add that actually does help people keep from going hungry, who can't just take a rutabaga and find the time to make something lovely for their family. So those are 3 witnesses I might recommend that you hear from. Emma and Heather Scholdice have been really helpful in helping me understand the battles that might have happened before around these things and how to advance these issues. And I leave that in your capable hand. I guess I'm passionate about this as well. I'll just end by saying, because, my husband grew up on a working dairy farm in Charlotte. It is no longer a working dairy farm. His father worked extremely hard to make milking cows profitable. And he had the money to try and pour into it, maybe not dissimilar from Jeremy Clarkson. He took a lot of money out of other ventures to dump into Nordic Farms and Berry Farms and Country Sneeders Farm, which they still own and does horses and sugaring. And it's simply not profitable on its own. If we want to keep our working lands and our farms we need to give them the opportunities to actually make a margin so that they can keep our landscape beautiful and in the character that most people expect to be able to see when they visit Vermont. I don't know how long it was.
However long you need. We should good right till 10 o'clock, and if you need more, all you gotta do is let us know.
Wait, you get 20 that.
So anything else that you'd like to tell us about the bill? Just kind of going through it quickly. We've got some of what you're doing here and some other bills and stuff, and we are holding back a miscellaneous ag bill
Yes.
that we're looking to be an attachment of some stuff. So we're gonna spend time on this bill all the rest of the week.
Great.
As far as going down through.
Great.
And
I guess I would just say, I don't try to tell others what to do usually. But when I hear that, it sounds like you all could put together a very formative food security bill. I, as people know, have worked a lot on housing and permit reform, and we often run into people wanting to classify things as prime agricultural soils, not to produce food, but just simply to keep any activity from happening on those sites. That's not good for our future. Our future needs to be rich with local food production, first to mitigate and manage the incoming impact of climate change. But also, it just makes us more resilient and self-sufficient as we look at tariffs, as we look at uncertainty in the future. The best thing we can do to mitigate risk in our state is actually use our prime agricultural soils for producing food and not let that conversation be co-opted into one of complete conservation. I actually
agreed very much with that.
I tried to bring Senator Starr into our Act 250 debates last biennium because Act 250 was originally created to keep working lands working, and it's been heavily co-opted to keep lands preserved and out of the hands of any human activity. And I just don't think that's good for our rural once and future agricultural state.
Any questions?
I agree with the.
And I know those farms in my area and in Addison County would love to have people visit anytime to see what they're trying to do. To be a farm near a population center, you really have to have opportunities for the public to interact with you to survive.
Senator, we thank you, and
Yeah.
we know where to find you.
Yeah,
And we'll be, like I said, we'll be spending some time on this bill this week.
thank you so much. And
Thank you.
when Linda says the word, I'll send you emails or contact information or. All right, thank you so much.
Very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we're going to spend a minute. Senator Hardy is going to come in and give some response on S-124. She's going to come in at 11 o'clock. So why don't we take a break until then? And then we'll continue on.